the director of Council of Arab-British Understandings, and he's joining me now live from London. Chris, good to have you here with us on TRT World. The Balfour Declaration pledged a Jewish homeland while promising to protect non-Jewish communities. Isn't this an inherent contradiction, and was not the resultant displacement of Palestinians a foreseeable outcome?
The Balfour Declaration, unfortunately, 106 years ago, was the really start of that long-term failure of the international community that Britain had such a major historical part of. So yes, Britain bears a massive responsibility. I'm not sure that the authors of the Balfour Declaration foresaw that there would be some sort of massive displacement of the non-Jewish population, as it was referred to, in Palestine, but they certainly, I don't think, gave much thought about that issue as to what might be the result. The thinking at the time, of course, was very much about whether they could get Jewish support for their war efforts in Europe, and that they did not want Germany to get that. They wanted Jewish support to get the United States into the war. That in itself, strangely enough, comes out of an anti-Semitic belief of the power of the Jewish lobby, that it could do all of these things. And indeed, many of those who supported the Balfour Declaration were indeed had very anti-Jewish beliefs themselves. They wanted to see Jews out of Britain. So yes, indeed, it is a long and very unfortunate period of history. And, you know, right from the outset, Palestinians was treated as having less rights. That hasn't changed. That remains the case today. We still see the situation where international law is given a little bit of reference in terms of this conflict, but it is not enforced. There's no sense of accountability when it comes to those who commit violations against Palestinians. So in 106 years, the Palestinians have always been the underdogs. They've always been the lesser people.
Now, you mentioned Britain there. Let me ask you to expand on that. Considering the direct line from the Balfour Declaration to the establishment of the State of Israel, how much responsibility does Britain bear for the enduring Arab-Israeli conflict?
Well, we started off with the Balfour Declaration, obviously, so that kick-started the Zionist movement. I mean, it was already existing, but it gave it a huge boost. You had the dominant power of the day giving support to it. This then got, of course, encapsulated within the terms of the British mandate for Palestine. And Britain then played this game for, you know, the next couple of decades of trying to balance out the desire to facilitate Jewish immigration into Palestine against the hostility that it did receive from the Palestinian Arab population, who were by far the majority. And at certain stages, it facilitated a lot of immigration. At other times, it started to block it. But really, the main point would be, come 1947, in handing this over to the newly created United Nations, Britain, coming out of that Second World War, just decided it was all too difficult and washed its hands of it and said, we can't deal with this, and left Palestine in May 1948 with what was clearly a war in place. I mean, half the Palestinian refugees became so before Britain left. It did nothing to leave in a manner that would lead to stability between the two sides, some sort of peaceful coexistence in the two states that were meant to come into being. Even as British forces were leaving, you had Israeli soldiers and troops shelling, Zionist ones, shelling Palestinians in cities like Jaffa and Haifa. So we bear a tremendous responsibility. It's not the sole responsibility. Since then, other powers have facilitated Israeli violations of law. There have been all sorts of other parties who have not honored their
Right.
obligations. And of course, the two parties themselves, you can't excuse them entirely of their own responsibilities, for why we've got to the dark place that we're in now.
Now, looking at 2023, a lot has happened over the past 3 weeks. More than 9,000 Palestinians have been killed, and perhaps we are seeing the highest tensions between the two sides in decades. Now, Chris, as you know, as everyone knows, that all wars end at some point, right? This one is also going to end. We don't know when exactly, but it will. When all of this ends, what do you think the future of the relationship between Israel and Palestine, Israel and Arab countries will look like? What do you think will be the future of the status quo of occupied East Jerusalem?
That is the key question, because let's take one thing for certain. We're going to have a situation where Israel is going to have to live with 6 million Palestinians, either inside its state as citizens or in the territories it occupies. It's going to live in a neighborhood that's dominated by Arab states and populations. Already, those uh, states that have made peace deals with it are moving away from Israel. Jordan has recalled its ambassador. We've seen that those talks on normalization with Saudi Arabia have been halted. So, a question to be asked now for Israel, if you're sitting in that Israeli cabinet, I hope they're thinking about this. Actually, where do they want this to land up? Because a lot of the signs we're seeing at the moment is there isn't much thinking of the long term here, that there is an immediate goal of trying to eradicate, in their words, Hamas, but not thinking where the political outcome is. And this is actually typical of all 6 of Israel's massive military operations on Gaza since 2005, that they win militarily on the ground, which of course is almost inevitable given that this is not a symmetrical warfare. I mean, they have all the military toolkit and they get resupplied by the United States. But they lose politically because they don't actually get the security that they crave and seek. The rockets start up again. They do not actually change the situation. They actually bring about new generations of embittered Palestinians living in that
Right.
hellhole of Gaza. And, they don't actually move forward. So, will this change now? Will they actually realize they have to come to a long term political solution with the Palestinians that involves freedom
Right.
and an end of occupation and the system of apartheid? If they don't do that, we're probably going to be back here again when all of this ends with another war.
Fascinating insights into the topic. Chris Doyle, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World.